Chuck Gillum was a friend of mine and a friend of the earth. I met him about 2002. Over the years, he became my amigo, my compadre, my compatriot, my accomplice, my counselor, my number one during 18 years of making good trouble for justice, peace, and the environment within and beyond the walls of Village Church. When I became discouraged, he lifted me up and pushed me forward. Together, we were involved in the Justice, Peace, and Environment Committee and the Environmental Action Committee at Village Church. Along with me and others in 2004, he helped co-found Sustainable Sanctuary Coalition of Kansas City and Earth Keepers of Heartland Presbytery. As Diane mentioned, it was Chuck who suggested the name Earth Keepers. Chuck was known for speaking his mind, for sending emails, for speaking truth to power, which included the village staff. Chuck's legacy is that he planted seeds. He planted seeds in our minds and in our hearts and in his children and grandchildren. He was passionate. He was a passionate and courageous eco warrior and a social justice warrior, and he passed his trait to his daughter, Carrie, an investigative journalist and author and public health warrior, probably best known for her battle against glyphosate, the cancer-causing ingredient in the herbicide Roundup. At last year's lecture, she was the keynote speaker. During his final days in the fall of 2020, at age 88, Village Church Senior Pastor Reverend Dr. Roger Nishioka asked Chuck if he had any regrets. His reply was, "I wish I had done more for the environment." Well, I think he did. To borrow phraseology from John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, when there was a meeting of the Justice, Peace, and Environment Committee, or the Environmental Action Committee, or the Sustainable Sanctuary Coalition, or Earth Keepers, Chuck was there. When there was an environmental class or workshop, he was there. When there was a Sustainable Sanctuary retreat at Shadowcliff Mountain, in the mountains of Colorado in 2004, he was there. When there was an Earth Fair at Shawnee Mission East, he was there. When there was a march in downtown Overland Park or a gathering across the bridge at Brush Creek on the plaza, protesting climate change, he was there. When there was a hearing at KU in Lawrence in 2006 about the proposed coal-fired power plant in western Kansas, he was there and he spoke. When EAC handed out 1,000 compact fluorescent bulbs to people leaving the church during Earth Week in 2007, he was there. When there was a Project Drawdown workshop upstairs in Friendship Hall here in 2009 with 130 people attending, including city officials, state legislators, local influencers, and activists, that eventually resulted in the formation of Climate Action KC, he was there. Today, at this lecture and panel discussion, I believe the spirit of Chuck Gillum is here.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate that. My name is Jo Randolph. I, as Diane mentioned, am the treasurer of Presbyterians for Earth Care. We are an organization that connects, inspires, and puts Presbyterians and other faith communities together for the care of creation. If you are at all interested, we help you with your Earth Care congregation. There are many webinars. We do at least one a month. You are always welcome to join those. And if you can't make it, we have a whole collection of resources that you can use in a Sunday school class or a community class at all. So in September of 25, we launched this Canopy, which is this group of young people that Diane just mentioned, and then we'll be hearing from Emma shortly. And they are bringing young people together with us as a group, inspiring and helping one another to care for God's great creation. So I appreciate you all coming here. You can have our contact number. All of you have our Heartland Earthkeepers email. You can contact me that way. So if you want to learn anything more about Presbyterians for Earth Care, let me know. And who's next? Rick.
Send this off there, Emma. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rick Randolph, and um, I am such a fan of Sustainable Sanctuaries Coalition and of Earthkeepers. Been working with them for many years. I've given a number of talks on healthcare and the environmental effects, but I have been just inspired by the people that are in this organization or these organizations. So I am kind of batting cleanup here. So really anything that we didn't cover, I guess about the only other thing is for those of us in this room right here, restrooms are out here and to the right. But other than that, I'm waiting to hear more about Canopy, and I think we will have a wonderfully informative morning. Thank you.
I'm Emma. As was mentioned, I'm from the DC area. I'm currently living in Princeton, New Jersey, and currently planning a move to Richmond, Virginia. So I will be all up and down the East Coast. I have been working since June with Presbyterians for Earth Care in the role of organizer of what has come to be known as Canopy, which is the Creation Action Network of Presbyterian Young Adults, if you don't think about it too hard and you ignore the word adults. So I will get us started here. So I wanted to kick off just by kind of giving you a little sense of Canopy, who we are, what our deal is. And then really what I want to talk about today is share with you all what I have been hearing from this really extraordinary group of young people. So Canopy represents folks 18 to 35 from across the United States, Presbyterians and their friends. We're not carding. It's a really, really incredible group. And I have just been so honored to get to know some of these folks and to hear from them, these folks who are doing the work on the ground in their communities, in their presbyteries, in the denomination, in their workplaces, in their schools. And I really kind of want to offer for you all today a little bit of a synthesis of what I have heard from those folks in terms of why they are passionate about environmental justice, how their faith informs that passion, and what we can do as a church, as local communities, as national communities to support and develop their leadership further. That's something that's a passion of mine, young people being able to define their faith and claim it as their own, and particularly to do so in defense of creation and in support of creation care. So this is Canopy's mission, which I will not read to you verbatim, but I just wanted to flag a couple of sort of key parts of what Canopy is trying to do here. So we are, spirit inspired and informed by the Presbyterian tradition, but we are also, we carefully chose that word informed by the Presbyterian tradition because we are open to all different traditions that help us discern the will of God for creation and discern justice in this world. Our goals are to advocate and act for environmental justice and to build power as a new generation of leaders by marrying our voices with one another's. We have three sort of action pillars in our mission. We seek to connect with one another across a broad array of, barriers of geography, diversity, and experience. We seek to educate and learn from one another through, different people's experiences and knowledge sharing. And of course, we seek to take action with our Presbyterian energy, intelligence, imagination, and love in solidarity with creation. So that's just a little kind of nut graph about who Canopy is and what we hope to be doing. Demographically speaking, at the moment, Canopy is about 43 folks strong. We are very, very excited by that number. And we are broken down across three different I classify us in sort of three different fields. We have 17 ministry professionals, in which I include clergy, chaplains, denominational staff, some of whom you will hear from today. We have some students, which includes undergrads. Again, you'll hear from, I think, one or two of those today, undergrads, graduate, and seminarians. And then we also have some folks that I've classed as like young professionals, folks who work in outside the church. They're working in secular fields, but they are very active in this work. And here's a smattering of the states that we represent. We have not yet made it off the continental United States. So if anyone has any friends in Hawaii or Alaska and wants to hook me up, I am always looking to break the ocean barrier there. So that's just a little bit about who Canopy is. So I want to pivot a little bit into why we think at Presbyterians for Earth Care, a space like Canopy is valuable and important. And I want to start by thinking, really thoughtfully about the effects of the climate crisis on young people in particular. These statistics may not be terribly new to the folks in this particular room, but I think it's worth giving them some attention. So I want to start by acknowledging that there's a real inequity in the impacts of climate change. Although previous generations have been the primary contributors to climate change, the worst consequences of this crisis will be felt by today's young adults, teens, and children. This is, of course, sort of just a function of linear time and the way that this particular crisis is unfolding. But it is, I think, worth noting that the decisions being made by previous generations are going to have lasting effects on folks who are in this sort of younger generation today. I think that's sort of worth noting when we think about who has a voice in our decision-making around climate. I'm also a social work student at the moment, so I'm reading a lot of articles from the American Psychiatric Institute. So depending on who you ask, depending on the sample and the study, somewhere between 74% and 96% of young people expressed serious and disruptive concern or worry over the climate crisis. Serious and disruptive concern or worry is kind of a fuzzy term, but it's certainly, it encapsulates a lot of different emotions. But it's also having really very practical effects on the life sort of trajectory of folks in younger generations. As you can see here, 38% of Gen Z reports delaying having children or choosing not to start having families due to environmental anxiety. And that's just one example. I chose that as a sort of a concrete and tangible example. Of course, there are lots of reasons folks may, choose not to have children or have a family. But I think that 38% are tying that decision to environmental anxiety is a real tangible example of that serious and disruptive concern or worry. The climate crisis is causing young folks to change the trajectory of their lives and is really constraining the decisions they are able to make. So those are just some statistics, I think, that point us towards the seriousness of this crisis for people in this 18 to 35 demographic that we're talking about. So when you ask young folks, I have discovered why environmental justice is important to them. A big and recurring topic that comes up is intersectionality and the way that environmental justice connects to just every form of injustice that we are seeing in the world today. A lot of folks have come to the work of environmental justice through other justice models, or they are involved in environmental justice, and that is leading them to be engaged in other types of justice movements as well. So I've got a couple examples here of this sort of intersectional impact of environmental justice. Of course, we know environmental racism is a really serious component of the environmental crisis. People of color are more likely to die of environmental causes than white people. And more than half of those who live dangerously close to hazardous waste are people of color in the United States. Similarly, economic inequality has a major overlap with environmental injustice, much like that statistic about, older generations contributed in greater quantities to the environmental crisis, and it will be experienced more directly by younger folks. Similarly, richer countries generate more pollution and waste than poorer countries, but poorer countries are more exposed to natural disasters and less prepared to withstand them. This one was a little bit interesting to me. In fact, it was a Canopy member who educated me about this one, which is that gender inequality has a major overlap with environmental injustice. Climate change is likely to push 16 million more women and girls into poverty than men and boys by 2050. And 47.8 million more women face food insecurity and hunger than men and are therefore more directly impacted by drought, famine, things like that. That wasn't really something I had thought about before I got into this work. And a Canopy member, pointed out to me some of these statistics that women and girls are also much more exposed to the risk of the climate crisis. So I've pulled this quote here, which I must confess is really a tweet that I have cleaned up a little bit for polite audiences. But this is Ursula Wolf-Rocca. And I think this quote, this tweet really kind of encapsulates what is bringing folks to environmental justice in this demographic. It can be overwhelming to take in all the injustices of the moment. The good news is that they're all connected. So if your little corner of the work involves pulling at one of the threads, you're helping to unravel the whole cloth. So when we think about the intersectionality of environmental justice, and when we think about all these different justice movements that may have brought some of our Canopy members to this work, or young folks in general to the work of environmental justice, we can think about that as we start to pull on the threads of environmental injustice, we are starting to pull on the threads of other injustices as well, and starting to have a real an intersectional and multidimensional view of the way that injustice is working in our world today. So with that in mind, I want to kind of introduce or pivot to sharing two major intersectional components of environmental justice that come up a lot for our members in Canopy. So as I've been talking to folks about, why environmental justice, what's bringing you to this work? What does your faith tell you about this work? I've had two major sort of current event or, social issues come to the fore in those conversations. And I kind of wanted to synthesize and offer those back to you all as an area of interest. So the first is global conflict and war. It will not probably surprise anyone to know that a lot of our Canopy members are deeply concerned about the pervasiveness of global conflict right now. Wars in, of course, all over the world, Iran, Gaza, Ukraine, Congo, Venezuela, all of these places have an environmental component. Often they are wars that have to do with resources, as we were seeing in Iran, that these wars have to do with who has access to environmental resources. Conflict minerals in the Congo is another good example. And at the same time, war has a massive impact on the environment and severely degrades environmental resources. I won't read this whole quote from the UN here, but in particular, a theme that has come up is the way that environmental injustice is being used to inflict damage in Gaza and inflict suffering and death. Artificial famine being one of those ways that that's happening. But you'll see in that quote that water and sanitation, infrastructure, different ecosystems are all being degraded through the conflict that is going on there. Another issue that has come up a lot, and my guess is this may be familiar to some folks in the room, a lot of our young folks read Braiding Sweetgrass and it changed their lives. And I say that with love because the same thing happened to me. Braiding Sweetgrass, a powerful, powerful text. And so a lot of our folks are really interested in restoring a Native or Indigenous relationship to land and a Native or an Indigenous land ethic as we think about how to address the climate crisis. Just as Canopy was getting started, there was an exciting event in the Presbytery of San Gabriel, which is out in California. They returned a significant amount of land to the Tongva people, which is a coalition of tribes, a federation in that area. And I've got a quote from the chief of that coalition and the executive presbyter of that presbytery here. But the presbytery owned this land. They had a community center on it. And as part of reparations and restorative justice, they returned that land that was taken to the Tongva people. And that's just one sort of very powerful and concrete example of how this intersectional environmental justice is working and making people excited about what the church might be able to do in this space. So now that we've talked a little bit about some of the issues, I'm going to invite us to be a little bit interactive here. I hope this will work with the Zoom. But I wanted to share this tool that I have used in sort of communicating with our young people and helping us articulate a faith-based or scripturally based perspective on environmental justice. This is a little graph I created. I will tell you right now, this is not a well-researched theological tool. This would not fly at a final exam at Princeton Seminary. It is not sourced. It is simply some themes I heard in conversation with our young folks, kind of made into a graphic that we can engage with. So what you've got here is a little grid, a little XY axis. And on the X-axis, the X-axis, the horizontal axis, we have two different ways of thinking about the relationship between humans and creation. I use creation pessimism and creation optimism. I've heard some other, so there's some other ways to phrase this, but we'll go with those terms for now. And I'll kind of explain what each of these points on the quadrant is, and then I'll share a biblical text that I think kind of speaks to each of these themes. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you all to plot yourselves on this graph so you can be thinking as we go through. So on the horizontal axis, we have creation pessimism, which is this idea that the relationship between humanity and creation is essentially conflictual or tense, that's fraught, that there's a struggle between sort of like man and nature, very 1800s. And so that's our creation pessimism. And then creation optimism is this perspective that creation and humanity really give to one another. There's something really renewing and regenerative about the relationship between humanity and nature more broadly. On the vertical axis, we have two different perspectives on humans' relationship to creation vis-a-vis their membership in creation. So at the top, we have humans as stewards. This is probably familiar to many of us who grew up in the church, that humans are set apart from creation in some particular way and responsible in some way for its care, its upkeep, and sort of its nurturance. And at the bottom here, we have humans as creation, which is a perspective that humans are but one more piece of God's wonderful creation for us, and that there's really no meaningful separation between humans and other animals, plants, the earth itself, and kind of just sees us as part of the fabric of creation. Now, all of these perspectives, I think, can be found in the biblical text. And because we are good Presbyterians, we like to root ourselves in that text. So I have 4 passages here that I feel like kind of speak to these overlaps. So over here in the top right corner, we have humans as stewards. So humans are separate from creation, and an optimism about that relationship, that there's this sort of, very beneficent stewarding of the land. So Psalm 8 says, "What are humans that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea." And then here in our bottom right corner, we have creation optimism. So again, there's something really positive about humans' relationship with creation. But this time we're seeing humans as just inextricably a part of creation, not a species set apart or a being set apart. So I have another psalm for us. "May the mountains yield prosperity for the people and the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor." We'll go over here to the left, bottom left, creation pessimism and humans as creation. This is Isaiah 24. I think of this as the punk rock quadrant. This is where things get a little dicey, so buckle up. Isaiah 24, "Now the Lord is about to lay waste the earth and make it desolate. The earth dries up and withers. The world languishes and withers. The earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant." So here we see as humans sin, as they transgress the laws, the earth and humanity are laid waste together. So humans and creation are linked. Their sort of thriving and their falling goes hand in hand, but it's a more pessimistic perspective on that humans can really do damage, not just to themselves, but to all of creation. And then we have up here humans as stewardship and creation pessimism, which is Genesis 3, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. "Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you are taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return." So here again, we have that stewardship model. Humans are cultivating the land. They are apart from it. And there's toil, there's struggle in that relationship between humans and creation. So having shared sort of how this graph works, I would invite you maybe to take a moment, let's say like maybe 1 or 2 minutes, to turn to the person next to you and share, where would you plot yourself on this graph. And after a minute or so, I'll invite anyone who would like to share. Maybe we could take like 2 or 3 folks to head to the, I think it's in the back left of the room. There's a camera and a microphone that you can, maybe we'll have a couple folks to come share.
So just face the camera and share away.
Well, I believe Psalm 72 projects on what seems to be, in my mind, the reality that has existed over the years. And God has created an environment in which we can have success and we can go forward and do well, but it's in our hands. I don't see God as coming down and doing something miraculous to make something happen that we ourselves as human beings can't make happen ourselves. I think he has given us the discretion to do with our earth what we should do with it. And if we're, if we do not take care of it and it falls apart and goes away in the next 200 to 300 years, that will be on us.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. There's this sense that we have the resources we need, and then we have autonomy within that space to make decisions that impact the environment and vice versa. Yeah. Thank you.
I've been all over those quadrants, but I tend to dwell more on the right side of the quadrant. I'm reminded what Chuck Gilliam said on more than one occasion. He says, who cares what people did or said 2,000 or 3,000 years ago? What matters is what they do in the next 20 or 30 years. And I think it was back in 2007, Dr. Marcus Board came to Village Church and presented a weekend. And one of his segments was Shepherding Life on Earth. And in that segment, he made the statement, there will be no divine rescue. It's it's up to us.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate that sense of that the time is now to make these decisions, and we have that responsibility, and we carry the weight of what we decide now. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
I've been working along with others on a overture about regenerative agriculture. And so that tries to use the attitude of Psalm 72. It's hard to stay positive, but by the way, I have appreciated the participation of some Canopy people in that work.
Great. Yeah, thank you for your leadership on that. We'll talk a little bit at the end about the overtures coming out of PUC right now.
Hi, I'm Rick Randolph, and I really gravitate towards Psalm 72 mainly because it's a Psalm of Solomon, and it's really saying what the king should be doing. And this is, how we should go and shape our leadership. And so I see this as a way to move forward, who to select, who to campaign for. And it just gives us a guidance as to, how we should select a leader.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing the biblical criticism as well and giving us that context. I think that does, it adds another person to the ecological triangle, right, of us and the creation and land. And then it also includes our governance and our leaders in that relationship as well. Thank you. One more.
I guess I feel that as Christians, we are more called to hope than to optimism.
Mm.
If we are suffering from creation destruction, our God is suffering as much or more than we are. And God is a pretty good person to have in your camp when things are going wrong. Like Jerry, I do not think there will be a divine rescue in the sense that things will get fixed and the terror that's building will be nullified. But I do believe that God will be with us through really difficult situations.
Mhm.
If we're suffering, God is suffering. And in the long run, God will win. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll preach. I love that. Thank you. I love doing this exercise because I get to hear, like, I think of this grid as kind of like a Rorschach test. It gives me really beautiful, just like insights into sort of different ways of looking at this, this conversation. And the thing I want to flag before we move on here is that all of these perspectives and more are in the biblical text. So the biblical text, the canon, has all of these perspectives. All of them are there. All of them, these are perhaps not even the most sort of like emblematic of each of these perspectives. And as I say, there are many more in the text. There's not, the biblical text doesn't give us a right way to view this problem necessarily, but offers us a variety of voices that speak to, I think, our climate grief, our climate anxiety, and our understanding of where God is in that story. So now I'm going to show you the right answers. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to show you how our young adults responded to this when I did this activity with them. So the yellow circles each represent like a voice in sort of a typical I did a bunch of these focus groups, and these represent sort of like an aggregate of that. So the thing that I think is most worth noting is that we only had one of our 18 to 35-year-olds, only one person identified with Psalm 8. This humans as stewards, creation optimism quadrant. Our young adults seem very clear that this model of humans set apart as sort of above creation on some way is perhaps not the generative and renewing model that we might hope that it would be. That's interesting. I think it's a model that a lot of us received in our Christian education and upbringing. But there's certainly a lot more pessimism than optimism if you accept those terms, which you do not have to. And there's certainly not a lot of optimism about this sort of stewardship model where humans are set apart. So I share that only to kind of, as I say, bring that voice to you. I don't necessarily have like and therefore about that. But I think it's worth noting that this idea that humanity set apart from creation is challenging for folks in this demographic. And perhaps, again, we can blame Braiding Sweetgrass for that. All right, so I just want to offer just quickly, kind of share this little like synthesized menu of what I heard from our young adults in terms of what they are looking for in justice-seeking movements, particularly around environmental justice in their churches, in their congregations, in their faith-based spaces. Over on the left, we have what we want to learn. The things that people wanted to learn were often very tangible. They wanted best practices, how-tos, things that have worked well in other congregations that they can replicate in their own congregations. And they also want leadership skills. These young folks feel like they have a voice, they have something to say, and they want to develop the skills to say it powerfully and to be heard. So hang on to that. We'll come back to that idea in just a moment. In the middle here, I have what we want to tackle, kind of what we want to take on, what sort of area issues came up a lot. The one I really want to highlight is this second one, promoting an environmental justice framework. So I always want to be careful about how I describe this, because I want to be clear that this framework is certainly, no one is hoping to promote this framework at the expense of another positive framework. But I think a lot of our folks are very familiar with a sustainability framework, which is, reduce, reuse, recycle, drive electric, bring your own mug to church, your own silverware, your own plate, which is awesome. And I think a lot of these young folks have really bought into that, and they thrift and they upcycle and they do all these really great things to make sustainable individual consumer choices. And they are very hungry for a framework in our church spaces, in our faith-based spaces, that speaks to justice and systemic change, and actions that might be more oriented towards those types of change rather than simply or only individual action. And to be clear, very in favor of a sustainability model. But this environmental justice language, this systemic framework, is something that people are looking to sort of add to their toolkit. And then over here, I have how we want to feel. What do we want to feel in this, in our spaces of young adult advocacy and environmental advocacy? Connected, of course. I think a lot of folks, especially in this age group, were really impacted by COVID and disconnection and isolation. And so that's something people are looking to sort of counterbalance. But in particular, I want to highlight that this group wants to feel confident as church leaders and taken seriously as leaders. Often in our faith-based spaces, especially in our aging denomination, everyone's so excited when a young person comes to church, right? It's like, oh my goodness, let's go say hi and put them on a committee, which I love. And are we really honoring their voices on those committees? I think a lot of our young folks have been in the position of being asked to participate and support and step up and take sort of leadership roles. But then when the rubber hits the road, their perspectives are maybe sidelined. This is certainly an experience I've had. A church I was a member of my entire life. In fact, the church I was baptized in and I'm still a member of, during anti-racism discourse and during COVID after the murder of George Floyd, you know, I was an elder on the session and my voice was taken less seriously than folks who had joined the congregation, you know, 5 or 10 years prior, because they had more life experience than I did. And that they honored me enough to, you know, put me on the session, but then in that space, my leadership was in some ways undermined. And so I think I've heard this echoed from our young adults, especially when it comes to environmental justice, that they are asked to be on session, they're asked to be on committees, they're asked to be deacons. And then when they try to sort of offer their perspective on environmental justice, you know, maybe they're a deacon and they say, let's switch to reusables. It's like, well, you haven't been here. You don't, you know, that we thought of it. There's so many complications. Like, well, if my voice is valuable enough to be in leadership, you know, I think then we would like to see our concerns brought to the fore as well. So I offer that kind of menu here. And I will take just a few minutes. I want to leave some time for questions here. But I do want to kind of walk through what I think can be a little bit of a challenging conversation. So I will ask you all to courageously go with me into this, just a couple slides here about activism and advocacy and how we sort of find our lanes as individuals, as generations, as a denomination. I've given a similar presentation to this in a bunch of different spaces. And a question I've gotten many times is, where were the young people at the No Kings protest? I don't know if anyone in the room has had this question. I personally will tell you where I was at the last one. I was working, but for the previous couple, I had been in attendance, and I too noticed that there's a demographic skew in the folks that attend these protests, right? They tend to be, you know, sort of middle-aged or older. They often tend to be white. They tend to be, you know, suburban to urban, you know, it just kind of depends. But that age demographic certainly, I think, that's a real observation, that there are not that many young folks at these activities. I brought this question back to Canopy. I was curious, what were you doing instead of going to the No Kings protest? And here's the question I got back, and this is where I'm going to ask everyone to be brave with me. Where were the older folks at the Gaza encampments? And I was so interested in that. And I will say, these two conversations happened separately. These were not folks in the same room talking to each other. I am putting these questions in conversation with one another. So I'm creating this tension. So I don't, you know, I want everyone to know that I'm doing this, and I apologize. But I think it's a good question. I think both are good questions. And I wonder if this is a question. I don't have an answer. I'm not going to have an answer for us at the end of this. And I hope that we will all kind of be able to go away and think about this and come up with some answers for ourselves. But I wonder if this is a question about finding our lanes. I wonder if this is a question about honoring one another's contributions and commitments, and lifting up one another's capacities and abilities. This is sort of how I feel about ministry in general. Everyone brings a different gift to worshiping God, right? Our youngest folks, our littles, they bring wonder and they bring childlike faith and they bring play. And our older folks can bring, you know, attention and seriousness and vocabulary. And we need everyone talking to each other to have a holistic worship of God, right? I feel similarly about activism work. Different folks bring different gifts, and we need to have a holistic conversation that values and uplifts all of those gifts. So in response to these questions, here are a couple of thoughts I have. I bring this quote back, this Ursula Wolf-Röcke quote back about us all picking one corner and starting to pull and unraveling the cloth. But I also bring this quote, which is from the YWCA of Central Carolina's Eva Marie Lewis. She's talking about activism and advocacy. To be an activist is to speak. To be an advocate is to listen. Society can't move forward without both. So I wonder about this activism and advocacy framework. Thinking about those terms, continues to be from the YWCA. Thinking about kind of defining these terms, these are proposed definitions. These are not conclusive definitions, but I liked them. So we have, and I've noticed just now a typo in both of these, I apologize. Activism is action-oriented. Activists take concerted steps to cause social and/or political change. Activists typically use direct, often confrontational action, such as a demonstration or a strike, in opposition to support a cause. On the other hand, advocacy is people-oriented. It can include active lobbying, including methods such as letter writing, meeting politicians, running public forums, questions in parliament, participating in various consultative processes. What I don't love about these definitions is I think it sets these two concepts as like poles on a spectrum. I'm not sure that works for me. It might work for some folks. What I do like about these definitions is it's very clear that you need both, right? They are both essential parts of making change and seeing things differently. I offer them as potentially some helpful language to guide our conversation around how people find their lanes, how people find the kind of activism and advocacy and change making and justice seeking that works for them and their particular skill sets, and how we as an intergenerational denomination can really honor and uplift and support one another in making our gifts heard and seen. I offer this I'll just very quickly, this is a dense graph and it may be hard to see in the room. I apologize if it is. This is from Tufts. They did this study about different ways that young people 18 to 34 are engaging in different types of political and social action. The top few, I'll read the top few and the bottom few. The top couple are help someone in need, talk to friends about politics, sign a petition, volunteer for a local organization, boycott a product. And then the bottom few are serve in a community leadership role, participate in a union, register others to vote, volunteer for a political campaign, run for office. There's probably some like just structural and logistical reasons that these sort the way they do, right? Like, I don't know that many 22-year-olds that like have the resources or the time to run for office. And, including like unions, that probably has something to do with like differing levels of participation in the workforce and different types of careers, things like that. But I do think it's interesting that these ones at the top tend to be social. They tend to be connectional and relational. They tend to be like local, hyper-local, volunteer for a local organization. So they have these sort of rooting in local communities. And then these ones down here tend to be more national, and they tend to be perhaps more abstracted from our day-to-day lives. So I offer that to think about, like, what is the lane of this younger demographic? How are these people sort of sorting into their camps? Okay, so really quickly, so we have time for questions. I just want to share a couple of things. As was just mentioned on the mic, we have some exciting overtures that you all may already know about coming to a GA near you in June. The titles of them are all here. You can find them on Presbyterians for Earth Care's website and read them in full. But the first one is an overture pushing for fossil fuel divestment, which is great and very exciting. A Green Futures Endowment Fund, and of course, regenerative farming and creation care. I also wanted to share on Monday night, Canopy is co-hosting with Presbyterian Peace Fellowship a conversation with Ben Daniel, the author of Grace Over Guns, about environmental destruction and the genocide in Gaza. That's an open meeting. Typically our meetings are just for Canopy members, but that one's open and the registration link is down there. If that's a conversation you'd be interested in participating in, I can put the link in the chat during the break as well, but it's bit.ly/Canopy monthly meeting. It's also on our Instagram page. And with that said, if you want to keep up with us, our Instagram is over here, Canopy_PEC. You can find us there. You can always, all these other links are all in our bio, so you can find them. The best place to find us is at Canopy_PEC on Instagram, and then the link in our bio. But we have an interest form if you want to keep up with us. That's my email if you want to get in touch. And what kind of organizer would I be if I didn't include our QR code where you can donate to support Canopy if that's something that would be meaningful for you. Well, thank you all for listening to me talk all that time. I'm excited to bring some other voices into the conversation. So I will introduce our panelists and we will get started. We have a great group here. So I'll start by introducing Jacob, who's in the room with you all. Jacob lives in Kansas City, Missouri. He studies broadcast journalism and film at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he also works as an RA, the Lord's work. He worships at both First Presbyterian Church of Lee's Summit and Village Presbyterian, where you can often find him in the AV booth. This summer, he'll work at Montreat Conference Center on the AV crew. He's interested in exploring how faith communities can live out their call to care for God's creation. So thanks for being here, Jacob. I will introduce Haley next. You want to give us a wave, Haley? Haley is a ruling elder at First Presbyterian Church in New Haven, Connecticut. She currently works for Presbyterian Life and Witness, supporting several General Assembly standing committees supporting denominational advocacy and equity. And this fall, she will be starting a master's program in environmental management with a focus on food and agriculture policy. Congratulations on that, Haley. That's awesome. Drew, you are next. You want to give us a wave? Drew was raised in the community of First Presbyterian Church Santa Fe, where he served as a youth deacon and elder prior to graduating high school. He worked as a summer staff at Ghost Ranch Retreat Center and served as a PCUSA YAV in Washington, D.C. He went on to a bachelor's in philosophy at the University of New Mexico, graduating in 2024, and served as a young adult advisory delegate to the previous General Assembly. Since completing his degree, he has worked as a district staffer for a New Mexico congressman until recently transitioning out of the office to pursue a law degree at UNM School of Law for the upcoming fall. Congrats on that, Drew. And our last panelist is Mary. Give us a little wave. Mary is originally from Raleigh, North Carolina, but recently finished her undergrad studying communication and advocacy at James Madison in Harrisonburg, Virginia. She worshiped at Massanutten Presbyterian Church while in school, and her home church is North Raleigh Presbyterian Church. She's looking forward to moving to Atlanta this fall to begin her Master's of Divinity at Candler School of Theology. Mary previously interned at an environmental advocacy nonprofit, is a member of Canopy, and is on the Overture Implementation Task Force for Environmental Overtures heading to the GA this year. So congrats as well, Mary. We have a lot of people headed off to exciting academic ventures in the future. So congrats to all of you. So thank you guys all for being here. I'm so excited for this conversation. And I'll get us started with our first question. So often in organizing work, we talk about this concept of self-interest, which is what is like your personal stake in a given issue area? What's your self-interest in having this problem be addressed? So I'm curious to ask all of you, what is your self-interest in environmental justice? In other words, what is your why for your WHY, why for environmental advocacy and activism? And if it's all right, Jacob, I'll start with you and we'll kind of go around.
Yeah. So can you all hear me okay? All right.
We got you.
Perfect. Environmental activism is really important to me. It's the first call that God gives us in Genesis 2. He says, I have the verse right here. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. That really speaks to me. It tells me that it's really important to God that we care for the creation that God gave us. I'm also really, really passionate about it because I see older generations and corporations and institutions continuing to neglect environmental care. And it really saddens me as this is the future that me and my generation and the generations that follow us are going to grow up in.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Haley, do you mind going next?
Sure. So as I think about how I'm now involved in environmental advocacy, I think back to when I was in high school and finally realizing what I kind of wanted to do with my life. And I feel like there's a real moment where I was like, God, I have no idea what I want to do. So push me towards something and I will do that and do it faithfully. And then I found a passion for political science and policy and government. So I was very interested in that, but I realized I needed kind of a focus within that. And I'd always been really good at science. So when I went to college, I was like, okay, I feel like environmental policy is kind of the crossover of these things. So it started very, I don't know, maybe just academic interest, but then it became so much more than that. And it's been something that has come so alive for me, you know, learning about sustainable agriculture and also like community work, addressing environmental injustices. And so all of those things happened. And I think really my why is bringing more voices to spaces of decision making and thinking about why am I at this table? Why are other people at this table? And who is missing? And making sure that there are systems in place so that people can be part of decision making, especially when it's impacting them. And so that is kind of the thread that weaves through all of my work.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Haley. Thank you. And I love that idea that God sort of speaks to us in our desires. There's like a Jesuit thing about that. And it sounds like that was really true for you. I appreciate that. Awesome. Drew, do you mind jumping in?
Yeah, I think my self-interest really comes from just my upbringing, being really connected to nature and public lands in New Mexico. I was really lucky to be able to do a ton of hiking and camping, cross-country running in the mountains above Santa Fe. And in high school, I got really into rock climbing, so that took me all over the Southwest to cliffs and working at Ghost Ranch Retreat Center. You're surrounded by all the natural beauty there as well. I think was one of the summers I felt super connected to nature and creation. And so, yeah, I think it was really the default of where I grew up and who I was surrounded by. And it wasn't until later I kind of realized that connection was under threat. And I had an environmental science class in high school that brought me to some of my first climate marches. And now being in the public policy space, seeing a lot of the efforts to sell off public lands and seeing some of my local lands. Proposals for transmission lines and an area I was fly fishing in growing up now has just been opened up for mining this week. And so yeah, I want to preserve that connection to creation that I had really as the default for those in my community and those to come.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Drew. And I'm sorry to hear that about your fly fishing spot. All right, Mary, tell us your self-interest.
Thanks, Emma. My story is kind of similar to Drew's. I grew up in nature, being from North Carolina. The East Coast beaches and the Blue Ridge Mountains is like what we did growing up. So I was always just very connected to nature, camping. I grew up going to overnight camp over the summer, and so I always had a really special connection with nature. And then I got to college and I took an environmental communication and advocacy class, and I was like, oh wow, like how we talk about the environment really matters, and how we advocate for it, how people understand it, really matters. And so that was kind of it kind of went from a personal interest growing up to then an academic interest of this, how we talk about the issue and how we advocate for the environment really matters. And so that's kind of how it went for me. And it's just been, I'm still very much, I have this semester off. And so I visited a lot of national parks, and it's just really reminded me how important it is to stay connected to that part of myself, even when the environment becomes like an issue to be advocated for. It's still something to be just like really seek God in, to be honest. So, yeah, that's kind of my why.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I love how much like the Presbyterian camps and conference centers appear in your all stories. I think that's very cool and a testament to like a unique strength of our denomination in this work. And I also appreciate how much your all's faith has informed your self-interest. In addition to your scientific and social justice expertise, your faith is really speaking into that. I appreciate that. Thank you all. So I'm now going to invite you into our sort of our brave conversation here about advocacy and activism. And I'm curious to hear, this is maybe, honestly, this will be sort of a new conversation for us all to be having as well. I have not necessarily talked about this topic with all of you as much as at some of these other topics. I'm curious about those terms for you. What did advocacy and activism, what do those two terms mean to you? How do they relate to the work that you feel you're doing? Do one or both or another label entirely? Do you feel like that applies to your work? How do you see these sort of two labels showing up in your work and your witness? And I think in the interest of not having the same person start each time, Haley, do you mind starting us off? Awesome.
Yeah, of course. So I see advocacy more about working in existing systems, kind of speaking through those, working with folks to kind of make change through those channels. Whereas I think of activism more as like direct actions to kind of raise awareness about something and kind of push the issue. And I've always kind of felt more comfortable and effective and maybe like called to the work of advocacy. And really kind of supporting other people in raising their voice and bringing their experience. So currently, I work for Presbyterian Life and Witness, which is one of the agencies of the Presbyterian denomination. And my work is to support committee members who are elected from throughout the church. I don't know if any of y'all know David Alonzo, but he is somebody from your presbytery that is on one of the committees. So for me, it's all about making all of the operations of General Assembly and the denominational agencies and all these things accessible to folks so that they can bring their stories, their experiences to the church and impact how the church is responding to different issues and making sure to welcome people and build a church that is more for everyone. And so I think in environmental work, I feel like for me, it's not as much about activism, like going to protests on the weekends. I feel like it's what I want to do for my entire career. So for me, it's advocacy that I'm doing every day and every job that I hold. That is the hope for me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love that. That's and thank you for your work also. Drew, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think I would define advocacy and activism super similar to Haley, working within existing systems, trying to change them, and activism maybe being more external or on the edges of those systems. But I don't think the distinction is super clean, and the work before us is really a both and. And so, yeah, I think it's just connected through different tools, different relationships, and I see activism as maybe expanding what's morally or politically possible, and advocacy translating that into policy change and institutional change. And so, for my own work, I would say it's more advocacy based, but maybe rooted in activist commitments and trying to stay accountable to those communities and movements, pushing for that deeper change.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to send me those definitions. I really liked them. Great. Mary, want to share with us?
Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate y'all's answers. And this question is really interesting. I think I have usually viewed advocacy as more of an umbrella term, considering I studied it so much in undergrad. It so much fell under it. And so I've always thought of advocacy as uplifting and amplifying voices that aren't heard or are marginalized, listening to those voices and then uplifting and amplifying them. And so what that looks like, I think, falls in so many different ways. One of those being kind of how we've defined activism is like protest or direct action. And then there's also lobbying and policy change. And so I've kind of viewed all of those as falling under this big umbrella term of like, how are we uplifting those voices that are not heard but need to be? And so that's kind of how I viewed it. But I think it's a really interesting distinction. In terms of kind of where I fall, I I fall kind of everywhere in there. I've done a lot of work in rhetoric and communication and writing of like how are we communicating about these issues. And I've done fundraising too, like how do we like create momentum and bring people into this issue and raise funds for these issues. So I don't know where that falls in terms of this advocacy activism, but I think I've always kind of defined my work as advocacy because I see it as such a catch-all term. But it looks like a lot of different things. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and thank you for bringing your academic expertise into that as well. I appreciate all that study and sort of how rhetoric and communication informs this as well. Thank you. Awesome. Jacob.
Yeah, thank you all for your insightful answers. I learned a lot. I think the terms advocacy and activism are unique from each other, but they're also deeply intertwined. I would define advocacy as listening to the problems that ordinary people face and using that information to build a case for change. And then I would define activism as the physical step that we take to affect that change. I'm studying journalism, so I think my work can fall into both of those categories. For example, I wrote an article this past semester for my school's newspaper about the inadequate work that my school does when it comes to recycling and sustainability. So that involved researching where the university fell short in their environmental goals, as well as talking to students and professors and staff about how they feel about the school's recycling and environmental goals and practices. I also want to bring up this Bible verse, Proverbs 31, 8-9. It says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy." So I think advocacy and activism are also biblical calls that we have to create justice in the world.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that verse. And I'm hearing in all of your answers, I'm hearing a strong commitment to uplifting voices that do not have a seat at the table, making sort of using our voices to amplify the voices of others. And I think that's hopefully, something that we as a church can contribute, which is that, our denomination does have access to halls of power in a lot of ways. And what does it look like to use that access in that space to lift up the voices of others, and do justice for those who might not have the license to do it for themselves. So thank you all. So now I'm curious, we have folks, you are all working in a wide array of settings and contexts and geographical locations and sort of at all different levels of the church and the rest of the world, a false binary, but so I'm curious, I want to do like a little status update. I'm curious, what is the status of environmental justice work at the place or the places where you do this work? So where the halls that you're moving through, the communities you're in, what is environmental justice looking like on the ground? That might be your local community, your church, your presbytery, the national office, the government, state or local or federal. I'm curious, like, what's going on? What's working? What has yet to be addressed? What is still needed from your vantage point on this work? And Drew, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty difficult time for environmental justice work. I think we're seeing a lot of really broad rollbacks on the federal level, even some state level, for environmental protections, expanded fossil fuel development. Data centers is something that's been really big in my community, especially data centers powered by fossil fuel plants. And so I think what comes with that is because the thread is so broad, the coalitions coming together are also very broad. And so that's where I've seen a big strength coming from local communities, faith leaders, indigenous communities, and even across political lines. There was a bipartisan public lands caucus that started up last year in response to the public land sell-off efforts that were happening. And I saw that really play a key role in kind of preventing some of those land sell-offs last year. I know there's new efforts coming on that this year. And so I've been encouraged by that. I've been encouraged locally. My congregation in Santa Fe has been really involved in protecting an area of land that we have our Easter services on and working with indigenous communities to try to protect that land. There's a proposal for a transmission line going through that area. It's also one of my favorite climbing areas locally. And then Canopy within the church, I think has been really inspiring to me to see the way people are asking how the denomination can move beyond statements and towards more tangible justice work. I think the work to come really, I want to see decision makers look beyond economic development and how they weigh economic development. I think that's something I'm seeing locally with, of course, fossil fuel expansion and data centers. Of course, jobs and investment matter, but we need to look through other lenses and weigh those long-term risks and the impact on frontline communities, especially. So hopeful about the coalition building, but I think part of the cause of that certainly is how broad the thread has been.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing your sort of up close familiarity with a lot of those policy changes as well. Thank you. Mary.
Yeah, thanks for that, Drew. I think it is a hard time to be in environmental justice right now, especially with, so many rollbacks on environmental protections. I'd say in terms of my local communities, my church, my home church, seems to have more interest in environmental advocacy, but there doesn't seem to be as much momentum as I would like. There was talks of having a creation care focus for the whole year, like a theme for our whole calendar year, and then that just kind of faded away. So people were like, "Oh, like Mary's interested in that. We should get her in this conversation," and then it just kind of disappeared. And so I think there's an interest, which is more than I've seen growing up in the church, but I just think there's not a ton of momentum. And there's worries about, this is too narrow of a focus or too controversial of an issue. So there's interest, but not as much momentum as I'd like. In terms of the nomination, I mean, we see, the Presbyterians for Earth Care doing a lot of good work as usual and bringing overtures to the General Assembly. I think there's good work being done there. I think kind of combining those two, I think there's a lack of congregational knowledge of what's going on at the denominational level. That's something I see. Like my church just doesn't seem to be informed or involved in what's going on in the denomination. And so I think something that Emma brought up during her presentation that I appreciated was there seems to be a lot of like sustainability focus, but something that young adults are desiring is this environmental justice framework. And so that's something that I'm seeing, my church is maybe interested in creation care or sustainability, but they're not as interested in that environmental justice framework. And what is the denomination doing to create systemic change or divest from fossil fuels or that sort of thing? And so I'm seeing these ideas exist in the Presbyterian Church, but there's that systemic framework. I'm seeing that there's room for growth there, and I mean, I'm really grateful to be a part of the work that's being done on the denominational level, but I think that there's still a lack of momentum locally to contribute to that and advocate for that. So that's kind of what I'm seeing in my communities.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I appreciate you naming something we've heard from Canby members a lot, which is that they're seeing a disconnect denominationally and congregationally. Either their congregation's doing awesome work and they're not sure how the denomination can support that, or the other way, they're aware the denomination is doing really wonderful work and their congregation is maybe not as attuned. So thank you for naming that observation that has been shared in this group. Awesome. Jacob.
Yeah, thank you guys for your answers. This past semester, I took an environmental justice class, and something that I noticed over and over again is that my class kept bringing up how helpless we feel as individuals to affect environmental change when it comes to how institutions neglect and abuse the environment. It's really hard for us to know where to start. Like with Mary said, there's just not a lot of knowledge among individuals and congregations about what the denomination is doing for climate justice. And I think when young people see how these older generations and corporations and governments neglect the environment, it makes us feel pessimistic about the future of our environment. I feel very pessimistic about it, to be honest. I think we need voices in local, state, and federal government who will advocate for environmental care, especially through a theological lens, given how much the political climate is motivated by theology right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate that. And I appreciate sort of this, I share that longing that to have faith-informed voices speaking into this conversation that represent a different version of that narrative. Thank you. Awesome. All right, Haley, bring us home.
Thank you all for what you shared. I feel like I've been seeing similar things. I think in my context, so in my local congregation and what I'm seeing at the denominational level, I think that most everyone that connected with really cares about taking action on climate change and supporting environmental justice and, in many different ways. But I think that people have different thoughts about how to do that. And there's kind of not I think people are still kind of discerning what that path is, what that strategy is. And also sometimes I think people are just overwhelmed by it's such a big issue, what specific action should we take next? So at the local level, in my congregation, our social justice committee, signed on to a letter about funding a climate and sustainability office in our town, and a couple of us went to the the town council meeting about it. And there were other people of faith that were there speaking in support of that too. We're doing an eco-imagination project about how to use our church's like property in ways that kind of express our identity, but outside and as part of the community. And then in my work with the denomination, I think that speaking about General Assembly and things coming before the whole church, I think, yeah, everyone really cares about the environment, but people see there being different ways to take that action, and they're just really, I don't think there's a clear next step. So I think sometimes people are like, well, we don't know what to advocate for because we disagree about what we should do, even though we really care and want to do the most effective action.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I also, the phrase eco-imagination is like, I love that phrase. But yeah, I think there's a real tension. I'm hearing sort of, and a lot of folks sharing about maybe enthusiasm or openness to the conversation and not exactly knowing like where to take your first bite of the apple, how to get into that, how to speak into that conversation. Thank you all. I appreciate all of your work on the ground and you sharing that work with us and kind of what you're seeing in your corner of this work. So relatedly, we've talked a little bit about congregations, and some of you have shared a little bit about what you're seeing in your congregations and your faith community. I am curious how your faith or your church community or both are supporting your activism, and likewise how your activism is supporting your faith. Kind of what is the relationship that you're seeing between the work that you do for environmental justice and your faith? And let's see, why don't we start with Mary this time?
Thanks. Yeah. I think faith and activism definitely pour into each other. I think I went on a trip by myself exploring a lot of national parks this past spring, and really that really reminded me of like where the faith is in my activism of like there during Holy Week. I didn't go to a single church service and I felt like an awful person, but I was like out in the middle of nowhere, but I was like, but God is here. Like this is where Holy Week is. And so that's really like I just saw God there, and that just like reignited something like the faith in me that feeds my activism. And in terms of how my congregation supports me, I mean, both of my congregations, even if they don't know exactly how to be advocates or support the issues that I'm interested in, they're really good at supporting me in other ways, like writing me letters when I'm applying for grants, or funding me themselves so I can go to conferences or do internships that aren't paid. So yeah, my congregations have been really great at supporting me financially, or just supporting me by writing letters or being there for me. It's really important in this time of especially exploring internships and jobs and needing networks. They've been really, really great supporting me in that way. And just being interested in the work that I'm doing has been really meaningful. So
that's great. I love that. It sounds like they are empowering you as a leader, both in the congregation and in the denomination. I love that. Thank you. Awesome. Jacob.
Yeah. I've only been part of the Presbyterian Church for about 5 years. I used to be part of a different denomination called the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And one of the things that really stands out to me after switching denominations is the emphasis that the PCUSA puts on social justice and climate justice. My former denomination didn't really address social justice that much, and they didn't address climate justice at all. So just being a part of this church that sees it as a really important issue has really inspired me. I went to General Assembly with a few of the other panelists here, and it was like just so incredible to see how the church on a national scale cares about climate and social justice. So being part of this church continues to inspire me to advocate for climate justice and for how my activism supports my faith. Again, being part of this church has shown me that activism is biblical, and it's a physical way that I can live out the call to love our neighbors.
I love that. Thank you so much, Jacob. That's beautiful. Awesome. Haley.
Thanks. So I'll start by sharing that I think similar to other folks, I feel closest to God and to my faith when I am spending time outside on a walk, gardening, like just kind of looking up at the sky and just being kind of amazed by the creation that we are part of. And it has been really amazing to be able to be a part of the Presbyterian Church USA. I didn't grow up in the denomination, so when I was in college, I started going to a PCUSA church, and I did a summer fellowship at the Office of Public Witness in Washington, D.C. And so I was, my whole time there was focused on environmental policy advocacy. And so that was a great way that the denomination and that specific office supported me in getting skills to do that work and make connections. And then in my current job, I think Mary also attended this event this past year, the Commission on the Status of Women, which is in New York City at the United Nations. I was able to go and attend amazing panels from activists from around the world speaking on like Indigenous rights, environmental advocacy, you know, the connections between gender and the environment. And so I think that there are really just so many amazing opportunities through the denomination that support my advocacy work and my faith. And at the local level, I spoke on a little bit of that too. I think currently my church is the way that I'm connected with my like local advocacy work on the environment. And that makes me really glad that I'm part of a community that prioritizes that.
I love that. Thanks, Haley. And I appreciate you kind of bringing the denominational voice too. I know that OPW fellowship has like a lot of people have had their lives changed by passing through that office. So thank you. Awesome. Drew.
Yeah, I would say my faith and church community really support my work by being a space that I can go to be rejuvenated. I think there's oftentimes I'll be working on a memo on a new project or doing something that is less encouraging, and being able to go home and be in a community where people share the same values or people are doing the on the ground work. I know there's been quite a few area cleanups that we've gone, filled a few dumpsters on the weekend with my pastor. And so being able to do that is some of that work that's also really rejuvenating, and being able to put that work into action. And so, yeah, even when I feel disconnected from the church as a broader institution, I think also the work I'm doing otherwise can help me feel connected to God. And so, yeah, I would say kind of can support each other. I think rejuvenating at my faith community, and then also feeling more connected to my faith by the work I'm doing.
That's awesome. Thank you guys. I love that. I love all those responses, and it's gives me hope and uplifts my faith to hear how your faith is informing this work and vice versa. In the interest of time, I think we'll do a quick lightning round. So I am curious for this group of people. We have a room of environmentally minded Presbyterians with us, and I am curious. I'm going to sort of maybe combine two questions, and you can answer this how you'd like. But I'm curious if you could see one thing change in the PCUSA, or if you could make one request of this group of people here, if you could sort of see a structural change happen that these people could jump in and contribute to, that we can support you in, what would that be? And we'll try to do kind of lightning round style. What's your like number one wish list item for this work in the PCUSA? And Jacob, can we start with you?
Yeah. I think that it's really important that to be able to explain your climate justice work through a theological lens. I noted earlier, speak up. Okay. Sorry. I think it's really important that you should be able to explain your climate justice work through a theological lens. I noted earlier that given how important religion is in our government, bad theology has kind of caused a disregard for the environment and our climate. So I think being able to reframe that as reframe your climate justice work as part of your theology is really, really important for the future of the church and of the world.
Thanks, Jacob. I love that. Awesome. Haley.
Yeah, thank you. I would say be willing and open to change your processes of how you meet, how you make decisions, how you figure out what your priorities are, to be able to welcome in new folks and make it accessible to new folks, and change those processes based on feedback that you have from other people. I think that the outcome is really important, but the process is like how we get there. So focus on the process.
I love that. I'm very Presbyterian. Thanks. Awesome, Drew.
Yeah, I think my answer maybe builds a little bit on Haley's, but I think I want to see the denomination and local churches really step into the role of leading by example. When I was a YAV in DC, I think I often heard people talking about how Presbyterians were super involved in drafting state constitutions. And at the Constitutional Convention, they sent a page down to the Presbyterian session meeting to see how they were running things. And seeing how that maybe influenced the formation of some of our government structures. I want to see the church step into more of a role like that today and structure itself and structure its processes in a way that sets an example for wider institutions. I think I was able to spend some time in El Paso working with churches that were opening themselves up as shelters on the border for immigrants, and being able to see that I think is much stronger advocacy in itself than just calling for immigration reform. And so I want to see congregations take steps like that. And fossil fuel divestment, I think, is an important example to be able to go into policymaking spaces and say, we're willing to do the same thing that we're asking you to do. So yeah, I want to see our church step into that role and makes our witness and advocacy a little stronger.
I love that. Thanks so much. Awesome. Mary, you want to bring us home?
Thanks. I want to echo everything Drew said. Those are for sure great steps to take. Coming from a young adult perspective, I guess what I would say coming from that lens, I kind of want to say too, like first, seeking out young adults, like going to young adults, like a lot of churches that I've been a part of. I'm one of the only college student, if not the only one. And they're like, where are the young people? And it's like, you have to go to them sometimes. You can't expect sometimes especially college age students to show up on your church by themselves, like show up at your church by themselves on a Sunday morning. So if you have a university near you, seek out college students. If they have environmental advocacy groups, which usually they do, like ask how you can help, like help them fundraise or offer to host an event. So I'd say first, like go to young adults near you, especially college campuses are a great way to meet young adults that are justice minded. And then a follow-up to that, like listen to those voices. I think something Emma mentioned that resonated was, sometimes we're invited into spaces, but our voices aren't always taken as seriously. So once you engage those younger voices, really hear what they have to say, listen and act on it. Don't invite young people in and then not actually take what they say seriously. So yeah, go to those young people and hear what they have to say and act on it. That's my request.
What a perfect request to end on. Let me say thank you all so much for taking the time to hear from and listen to this group of young adults. I appreciate that. And I am also so appreciative of these 4 young adults for taking some time on a Saturday to share their perspectives with this group and with me and being a part of all this work. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions from the room. So cameras at the back. Head back to the microphone if you have a question, and we will do our best to answer.
Good morning. Yes, I have a question. As each of you reflect on the path that has brought you to where you are today, what support, resources, or guidance might have been helpful for you to move more easily, more effectively along that path?
Thank you. So the sort of like maybe what did you need that you didn't get that you kind of, if you were looking back, you would be helpful?
Support, guidance, perhaps financial support, whatever. What would have been helpful?
Great. I will let us maybe popcorn respond to these as answers come to folks.
I'll name one thing is a group like Canopy. I think we're all talking about being often included in church leadership and different councils. I was lucky to be on session and serve as a deacon, and yeah, there's often times where we aren't always heard as much, and so having a group where it is young people and we're getting to be amongst ourselves and work amongst ourselves and strategize across the country, across the denomination, across different interfaith ecumenical spaces, I think is super important. So I've been super grateful for Canopy and wish it was something I had earlier on.
And I should mention Drew is part of our steering committee, so he was an integral part of making Canopy happen. So we are likewise grateful to him for making this space possible. Awesome.
I'll jump in. I think when I first joined the PCUSA, I didn't have a lot of connections to the denominational church. Like I didn't really hear about it. It was I was at Montreat when I heard Jimmy Hawkins, who's in charge of the Oz Public Witness. That's how I got connected to that fellowship. But I wonder if there are ways for people who have been around in the denomination for longer to connect young people with some of the opportunities at the denominational level, like to do fellowships, to go to the UN, all these things, because I think people get connected in kind of random ways. And if you folks can be connectors for young people to those things, I think that that would be just amazing and get more people into those spaces.
I love that. Thanks, Haley.
I would say echo the connection to opportunities is super important. There are a lot of opportunities that I just didn't know about. So making sure young people know what opportunities are available to them. And also to speak to the financial bit, I would say like just implementing scholarships, I think is great. Like if you have like something I wish my church would have had was like an unpaid scholarship, like unpaid internship scholarship, because I did multiple unpaid internships in college and that was really tough. And if my church had had like even if there wasn't someone in their congregation that needed it, but just like a yearly, we're looking for young people who are interning at nonprofits that need scholarships to support them as they do these internships. I think that would have been great, especially I worked at an environmental advocacy nonprofit 20 hours a week and got no pay for it. But I think if my church had known that I needed that and had some sort of program implemented, that would have been really helpful. So implementing some sort of scholarship, especially for unpaid internships, I think would be helpful.
Yeah.
I love it.
To kind of echo Mary's point, my school has a scholarship program kind of like that. We have a grant from the Mellon Foundation that lets humanities students get paid for unpaid internships. So we're working for other companies and organizations, but we're getting paid by the school. And it has made a huge difference in our work as student interns. And I think it would be a great thing that the PCUSA could really lean into, not just for environmental justice agencies, but other social justice groups.
I love that. That's great. Awesome. Yeah.
Question. The United States produces about 11 or 12% of the world climate change gas CO2 equivalents. And there's a lot of opportunity for growth. There's a lot of countries, particularly the least developed and some of the more rapidly less developed countries that have these inflection points coming up as to the direction in which they will go in terms of climate change. Is there much thought or much discussion within Canopy regarding international, particularly lesser developed countries, environmental programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from within Canopy, I think we have been mindful about where and how much power we have, where we have leverage, and also where we have expertise, or where we have sort of like first or second hand contact with the issues we're discussing, which means that a lot of our work and dialogue has been domestic, because it will perhaps not shock the room to know that a group of 40-something Presbyterian young adults is very white. We are all US based, we are all American. And the places where our voices carry weight are often closer to home. I would maybe ask, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Mary, so if this is not, but the Green Futures Overture coming out of Presbyterians for Earth Care, and Drew as well, but sorry, the Green Futures Fund, I know, has to do with building resilience and protecting against sort of the unequal impacts of a shift away from fossil fuels. Is there some overlap there that either of y'all would be willing to speak to, or am I sort of out in left field a little bit? And I may be.
No, that'd be great if you could discuss that. It's just whatever, so much of the environment is just outside of the U.S. And if we want to go and address it, then, effectively, then we need to go and work there also.
Absolutely.
Well, I can't necessarily speak directly to that Green Futures Fund having an international component to it. I know there's probably going to be a lot of wider discussion on our denomination's role internationally, this GA with the Unification Commission and some of the shrinking of our international mission. But that Green Future Fund is calling for the establishment of an endowment fund to support environmental efforts. And I think if we can continue to build on our international relationships with that funding, I think that's certainly a possibility. And that overture really just directs more study and a little bit putting practical ways that we'll put that funding to use. So it's not establishing the fund in itself, but establishing a group to establish the fund. And so there'll be a little bit more clarity on what that might be able to go to internationally.
Yeah, and I think Drew, you flags a good point as well about it's worth noting that our denomination's international footprint through like mission partners and things like that is changing. And also, I think to sort of to the question itself, I think this is a group of folks that is interested in sort of that process of repentance for the way that our country and our world, our sort of immediate world, has contributed to climate change on a larger scale. And so focusing our advocacy work locally, I think, is a part of that sort of taking ownership, taking responsibility, and repenting. There certainly is absolutely room for international expansion, and maybe that's something we will be looking towards in the future. I see you have another question at the mic.
I'm recalling that in the early church, the formation of congregations was helped a lot by the travel of Paul, who visited and then wrote letters afterwards. Well, in our present day, it's not necessary to physically travel. You people who we have seen on the screen today have been inspiring. And I think it would be great if your images and some of your comments could be part of what happens on a Sunday morning in our local churches. And I would like to see you all be supported in developing a set of these presentations that could be dialed into by our local congregations to have an environmental moment during the Sunday morning service. And I think that that would take some coordination, some time to do it. And right now, it might be hard for you to fit that in, but if there were more support given by our denomination to your position, there would be time to help make that happen. And I think that our local, it would provide an occasion for specific collections to be taken, for example. One of you appears on our screen in our service, well, then pass the plate afterwards. Particular instances like that can provide some fine granularity to the kind of campaign we need to have.
Absolutely. I love that idea. And you are speaking what's in my heart, which is that this group of folks is such a wonderful collection of ambassadors. And so their expertise and their experience and their passion for it, I think, has that sort of powerful conversion quality to it. I think there's certainly, as much as we can get this conversation in front of folks in a way that is meaningful and accessible and feels real. And I hope that's what this group is doing today. And I would love to see that continue, certainly in churches all over the country. And I think maybe that speaks to some of the gaps that our folks here have identified between congregations and the denomination and congregations and each other, and just kind of reforging some of those connections. Yeah, thank you. I'm mindful of time, but it looks like we've got another question. I think if no one stops me in the room, I think we're okay to take it.
I think everybody's engaged. I wouldn't want to stop too soon. My question is, how many of you all have attended your home church where you've heard a full-fledged environmental sermon?
That's a good question.
That's a good question to ask anybody that goes to church. How often has your pastors preached a full-fledged environmental sermon? And I'll go on the soapbox, and I've also long advocated that the best way to inform and inspire about environmental concerns is to do something in worship, a full-fledged environmental worship service with songs, liturgy, prayers, and a sermon. You can have classes, but how many people actually show up to a class? If you have kind of a captive audience, not too many people would walk out if you spent the entire worship service focusing on what I would call environmentalism.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. A metaphor I've used in the past for different sort of justice movements in the church is, we're turning the whole cruise ship. We're not just having bingo on the third deck. And I think sometimes classes, things like that, often can be, to use another church metaphor, preaching to the choir, which is great. And as much like we've talked about hope and feeling affirmed and feeling uplifted and the value of a group that supports one another. I think worship is the central act of our Christian life in a lot of ways. And part of turning the ship, part of that act of repentance and recentering justice involves dedicating our worship to God and God in creation as well, and to the justice that God longs for all of us. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Can I take like 30 seconds? Any of the panelists, is there anything that we did not share that you would like to share in 30 seconds? Looks like we're good.
Well, I will just share on that last question that you do have a resource with Presbyterians for Earth Care and Canopy. I know some of our membership has gone and guest preached on Earth Day. And so definitely reach out to our groups. Maybe I think we have an upcoming MDiv with Mary and certainly Emma. And so there might be opportunities there for some environmentalism from the pulpit.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Thanks for flagging that. And certainly PEC also has great worship resources on their website. We are always happy. Yes, Canopy does have a lot of pastors and seminarians who would be happy to come support that.
Hi, I have a quick yes/no question for Drew. You're in Santa Fe, right? I'm wondering if you might know the pastor in Taos, Reverend Jenna Barbie.
That rings a bell from a Presbyterian meeting, but not super close. My pastor in Santa Fe is Andrew Black, who I've spent the most time with.
Yeah, but she's been in Taos for at least 10 years, 10, 12 years. But she used to be a youth intern one summer, many summers ago when our daughters were in the youth group. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to represent our groups here and just say this has been magnificent. And it's just been such an eye-opener and a refresher of how to engage in all ways with that wonderful intersectionality. I'm glad you brought that word back up again, Emma. And just to see young persons from all over this continent, and certainly with Jacob right here in front of us, we just want to thank you so much. You've been outstanding and visionary. And I do want to also mention that Joe stated something which actually Emma had referred to, that I'd do a quick lightning round on that, and then the Reverend Chad Cooper will end us in a reading, which you can all follow along. You may not have it online, but you can all follow along. It's a closing prayer. So we here at Village Church, representing several groups, thank you, and send gratitude for God, Gaia, and all of the creation represented here in this room and on Zoom. Thank you so much.
What I was hearing from all of you as a long-term educator,
I believed in team projects because we cannot do it all ourselves. We all have a skill. And so I mentioned to Diane that as we're talking today, we're learning about two parallel groups that are working with that double yellow line. We need to get rid of that double yellow line, turn it into that short white line where we do that zipper merge, and we'll have a much stronger event, activity, activism, advocacy, because we support one another with the skills that we are capable of doing well.
Amen, sister.
It's okay. Do you want this mic?
I've got this one, thanks. All right, well, let's give them a round of applause. Great job, everyone. It's great to see young folks doing great work. And I think this has hopefully inspired all of us, but it has inspired me as someone who has worked with Sustainable Sanctuary for quite a while. I was doing the math today. I think 13 years I've been working, and in recent years just been a volunteer because my time is so busy. And I've thought recently, as we do these monthly programs, what can we do as an organization to do more, to reach out to young folks and to do more? And one of the ideas that we've had was to provide some scholarship money. So I think we have some intersectionality here going on, possibly divine intersectionality of giving some scholarship money to high school students, to college students who might have a project that they'd want to do, whatever that may be. And this is just kind of what I thought, like saying, hey, we'll give you $1,000 for the project and then $1,000 scholarship that you get to take and, do college or whatever that money amount would be, we'd have to work on that. But I think this may be a great opportunity. And I think what Jim shared was a really excellent idea of this idea of making some videos, maybe a 2 or 3 minute video that we could share in congregations. And I think I would commit the Sustainable Sanctuary would ante up some funds for that. And for the folks on the committee today, on the team today, maybe we could do that. You guys could create maybe a 3 minute video. We could give you a little scholarship or a stipend or however you might want to do it. And then Sustainable Sanctuary, we could edit those, put those together, and then share them. So kind of collaborate with the Earth Keepers and Sustainable Sanctuary and this team. So I don't know, just some ideas. I hope that it's great to be inspired, but I hope that inspiration will motivate us to action and to advocacy and to do something. Not just show up and learn and listen and say, that was so great, and then go back to our normal lives. I hope this will really motivate us to do something different that will actually do some real caring for creation. So anyway, thanks so much for the panel. Thanks so much for everybody in person. We've got a responsive reading here. So if you get your sheet here, I will read the light print, and then you will respond with the dark print. And this is a responsive prayer from the Episcopal Church of Scotland with some modifications. So here we go. Blessed God, whose love calls the whole creation into covenant with you, and who puts in our hands responsibility for the care of the earth and its creatures, we pray for all to whom you have given life and being, saying, merciful God, sustain your planet and the people in peace. For the well-being of the earth, for its resource of water, air, light, and soil, we pray, merciful God, sustain your planet and people in peace. For the waters of the earth, for their careful use and conservation, that we may have the will and the ability to keep them clean and pure, we pray, merciful God, sustain your planet and your people in peace. For the energy resources of the planet, that we may learn sustainable consumption and care of the environment from which they come, we pray, merciful God, sustain your planet and people in peace. For the animals of the earth, that we may thrive in harmony with one another, we pray, merciful God, sustain your planet and people in peace. For all who shape public policy affecting the planet and its creatures, that they may consider wisely the well-being of all who come after us and particularly upholding the youth, we pray, merciful God, sustain your planet and people in peace. Gracious God, grant that your people may have in them the same mind that was in Christ Jesus, and guide us into harmony of relationship through loving kindness and the wise use of all that you have given. For you are drawing all things into communion with you and with each other by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.